The galaxy had never seen a species quite like humans. They arrived on the interstellar stage 300 years ago with nothing but old ships and big dreams. They did not come with weapons drawn or demands on their lips. They came with smiles and handshakes and a strange belief that friendship could be found among the stars. Ambassador Daniel Price remembered the first time he stood before the Galactic Concord assembly on Nexus Prime. He was young then, full of hope and certainty that the universe would welcome humanity with open arms. He had prepared his speech for weeks, practicing every word until it flowed like music. He spoke of cooperation and mutual growth. He spoke of trade and cultural exchange. He spoke of a future where humans and aliens would stand together as equals. The Velthari delegate, a towering insectoid creature with 6 arms and compound eyes that glittered like black diamonds, did not even let him finish. High Speaker Zithros raised one segmented limb, and the chamber fell silent. The human proposal was denied before Daniel could even present its details. No explanation was given. No discussion was allowed. Daniel returned to Earth with his hope bruised but not broken. There would be other chances, he told himself. The galaxy just needed time to see what humanity had to offer. 300 years passed, and humanity was still waiting. Captain Laura Bennett stood on the bridge of the humanitarian vessel Starlight Hope and watched the Velthari colony grow larger on her view screen. The colony had been struck by a terrible plague that their own medical science could not cure. Thousands were dying every day. Human scientists had developed a treatment within weeks of learning about the outbreak, and Laura had volunteered to deliver the supplies personally. The Velthari did not thank her when she arrived. They did not acknowledge the sacrifice humanity had made to help them. They simply took the medical supplies and told her to leave their space immediately. When Laura requested permission to resupply at a nearby station before the long journey home, her request was denied without explanation. She made the journey back to Earth on half rations. Her crew growing thin and tired, but she never complained. This was what humans did. They helped even when help was not appreciated. They extended their hands even when those hands were slapped away. On Earth, Admiral Christopher Grant sat in his office at United Earth Defense Command and read report after report of attacks on human vessels. Pirate ships had been targeting human merchant convoys with increasing frequency. The attacks were brutal and efficient, leaving no survivors and no evidence. But Christopher had been a military man for 40 years, and he noticed patterns that others missed. The pirate ships flew with Korathi battle formations. They used Korathi weapons. They struck at times when Korathi patrol ships were conveniently absent from the area. Christopher presented his evidence to the Galactic Concord. He showed them the sensor logs, the weapons signatures, the communication intercepts. The case was clear to anyone who cared to look. The Concord ruled the evidence inconclusive. The Korathi representative, a feline creature with golden fur and cruel eyes, named Matriarch Shara Cole, smiled at Christopher as the ruling was announced. It was the smile of a predator watching prey that did not know it was already dead. Christopher returned to Earth and buried his anger deep inside his chest. He was a soldier, and soldiers followed orders. The order from President Samuel Torres was clear. Maintain peace at all costs. Do not give the galaxy a reason to see humans as aggressors. So Christopher trained his forces and upgraded his ships and waited for a day that he hoped would never come. Commander Patricia Cole was Christopher's most trusted aide. She had served with him for 15 years, and she knew him better than anyone. She saw the way his jaw tightened when new reports came in. She saw the way his hands clenched into fists when he read about another human ship destroyed, another human crew murdered. One evening, she placed a new report on his desk. A human research station in the Kepler Reach had been destroyed. 47 scientists were dead, including 12 who had been working on a cure for a disease that affected multiple species. The Draenei, cold reptilian creatures who ruled a vast empire of ice worlds, claimed the station had been built in restricted space. No such restriction had ever been communicated to humanity. The Draenei had simply decided that the space was restricted after they learned what the human scientists were researching. They did not want humans to be the ones who cured a galactic plague. They did not want humans to earn that gratitude. Patricia watched Christopher read the report. She watched him close his eyes and breathe slowly, pushing down the rage that threatened to consume him. "What do we do?" she asked. Christopher opened his eyes. "We do what we always do. We file a complaint. We present evidence. We ask for justice through proper channels, and when they deny us again, then we file another complaint, and another, and another, until they listen or until we run out of breath." Patricia wanted to argue. She wanted to tell him that 300 years of complaints had achieved nothing. She wanted to tell him that the galaxy would never respect humanity until humanity demanded respect. But she held her tongue because she knew that Christopher already knew all of this. He knew it, and he carried that knowledge like a stone in his heart. President Samuel Torres addressed the United Earth Parliament that night. His voice was calm and measured as it always was. He spoke of patience and perseverance. He spoke of the long arc of history bending toward justice. He spoke of humanity's duty to be better than those who wronged them. "We will not become the monsters they expect us to be," he said. "We will seek justice through proper channels. We will maintain our dignity and our principles. And one day, the galaxy will see that we were right to do so." The Parliament applauded, but the applause was hollow. Everyone knew that the galaxy was not watching humanity with admiration. The galaxy was watching humanity with contempt. The Velthari mocked human diplomats at every gathering. The Korathi hunted human ships for sport. The Draenari erased human achievements and claimed human discoveries as their own. And still, humanity smiled. Humanity negotiated. Humanity compromised. Daniel Price, now old and gray, prepared another proposal for the Concord Assembly. This would be his 18th attempt to secure membership for humanity. He no longer believed it would succeed, but he would try anyway, because trying was all he knew how to do. Laura Bennett loaded her ship with supplies for another humanitarian mission. This time to a Korathi colony struck by famine. She knew they would not thank her. She went anyway. Christopher Grant reviewed his defense plans and prayed they would never be needed. And somewhere in the cold depths of space, the galaxy laughed at the weak, foolish humans who refused to fight back. They had pushed humanity for 300 years, and humanity had done nothing. Surely, they thought, humanity would never do anything. They were wrong. New Providence was the most beautiful world humanity had ever built. When the first colonists arrived 2 generations ago, they found nothing but barren rock and thin atmosphere. There was no life, no water, no hope on that dead world. But humans looked at the lifeless planet and saw potential where others saw only waste. They worked for 60 years to transform New Providence. They seeded the atmosphere with oxygen-producing bacteria. They melted ice from distant asteroids and filled the empty basins with water. They planted forests and built cities and raised children who had never known any other home. 12 million human souls lived on New Providence, and every single one of them had helped create something from nothing. The galaxy watched this transformation with a mixture of confusion and envy. The Velthari had passed through that system 1,000 years ago and deemed it worthless. The Korathi had surveyed it and moved on. The Draenari had not even bothered to send a probe. But humans had taken that worthless rock and turned it into a paradise. High Speaker Zithros called an emergency session of the Galactic Concord. He presented ancient star charts that showed the New Providence system within historical Velthari territory. The charts were questionable at best and fraudulent at worst. But the Concord did not care about evidence when it came to human affairs. The ruling came down within a week. New Providence belonged to the Velthari. Humanity was given 30 days to evacuate. Admiral Christopher Grant received the orders at his command center on Earth. He read them 3 times because he could not believe what he was seeing. 30 days to move 12 million people. It was impossible. Every ship in the human fleet, working at maximum capacity, could not accomplish such a task. He called Commander Patricia Cole into his office and showed her the orders. Her face went pale as she read them. "This is a death sentence," she said. "They know we cannot evacuate everyone in 30 days. They are condemning millions of our people to die. Christopher nodded slowly. He had reached the same conclusion. The Velthuri did not want New Providence for themselves. They wanted to punish humanity for daring to succeed where they had failed. They wanted to break human spirit once and for all. President Samuel Torres addressed the parliament with tears in his eyes. He announced the evacuation and called for calm. He promised that humanity would find a way to save everyone. He lied, and everyone in the chamber knew he lied. But they let him lie because the truth was too terrible to speak aloud, Captain Laura. Bennett commanded the transport ship Gentle Dawn during the evacuation. Her vessel was designed to carry 500 passengers in comfort. She packed 4,000 people into every available space. Families huddled in cargo holds. Children slept in corridors. The air recyclers struggled to keep up with the demand. Laura worked 20-hour days, ferrying refugees from New Providence to the safety of human space. She watched mothers clutch their babies and fathers carry everything they owned in small bags. She saw old men weep as they left the world they had spent their lives building. She saw young couples hold hands and stare back at the shrinking planet with hollow eyes. On day 25, the evacuation had moved 2 million people. 10 million remained on New Providence with only 5 days left. The Velthuri fleet arrived on day 28. 50 warships emerged from faster-than-light travel and surrounded the planet like wolves circling wounded prey. High Speaker Zithros broadcast a message to the colony. His voice was cold and filled with satisfaction. Any humans remaining on New Providence after the deadline will be considered trespassers, he announced. Trespassers will be dealt with according to Velthuri law. Laura was loading another group of refugees when the message came through. A young pilot named Marcus Webb sat in the cockpit beside her, checking the navigation systems for the journey home. Marcus was 26 years old, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. He had volunteered for the evacuation because he could not stand by while his people suffered. "We need to move faster," Marcus said. "We need to save more of them." Laura looked at the desperate faces of the refugees boarding her ship. 800 of them were children. Small children with small hands clutching small toys. Too young to understand why they were being torn from their homes. "We will save as many as we can," she told Marcus. "That is all we can do." On day 29, the Gentle Dawn departed New Providence for what would be its final voyage. The ship was dangerously overloaded with 4,000 passengers. But Laura refused to leave anyone behind who could fit aboard. She guided her vessel away from the planet and toward the safety of human space. A Velthuri patrol ship intercepted them before they could jump to faster-than-light speed. "Human vessel," Velthuri pilot broadcast. "You are carrying trespassers. Surrender your passengers for processing." Marcus responded with desperation in his voice. "We are a refugee transport. We have 4,000 civilians aboard, including 800 children. We are leaving as fast as we can. Please let us pass." The Velthuri pilot did not respond with words. He responded with weapons fire. The first shot struck the Gentle Dawn's engine section. The ship shuddered, and alarms screamed throughout the corridors. Laura fought to keep the vessel stable while Marcus broadcast a distress call on every frequency. "Please stop," Marcus begged. "There are children on board. We are leaving. We are doing what you asked. Please stop." The second shot struck the passenger compartments. Laura heard the screams of 4,000 people as the hull breached, and atmosphere rushed into the void. She heard the cries of 800 children as they were torn from their mothers' arms by the vacuum of space. She heard Marcus still begging the Velthuri to stop, still believing that there was mercy to be found in hearts that had none. The third shot destroyed the Gentle Dawn completely. 4,000 humans died in an instant, including Marcus Webb, who spent his last breath pleading for the lives of strangers. The news reached Earth within hours. President Torres stood before the Parliament, his face pale as death. The chamber was silent. No one breathed. No one moved. Everyone waited for the president to speak. Torres opened his mouth, but no words came out. For the first time in his long career, he had nothing to say. The language of diplomacy had failed him. The vocabulary of peace had abandoned him. There were no words left that meant anything. He stood there in silence for a full minute. Then he spoke 3 words that would echo across the galaxy. And through the centuries to come, no more diplomacy. The Parliament erupted. Not in applause, not in argument, but in something that sounded almost like relief. 300 years of patience had ended. 300 years of turning the other cheek had reached their limit. 300 years of believing that kindness would be rewarded had finally been proven wrong. President Torres looked into the cameras that broadcast his image across human space and beyond. His voice was no longer calm. His voice was cold as the void that had swallowed the gentle dawn. "You killed our children," he said. "Now you will learn what that means." Humanity had finally snapped. And the galaxy would never be the same. The galaxy expected fire and fury. They expected human warships to come screaming out of the void with guns blazing and vengeance burning in their hearts. They prepared their defenses and mobilized their fleets and waited for the storm to arrive. The storm never came. Instead, humanity went silent. Every human embassy across the galaxy closed its doors on the same day. Every human merchant vessel returned to home space. Every human diplomat, every human trader, every human tourist packed their belongings and left without a word. The borders of human territory became walls of silence that no signal could penetrate. High Speaker Zithros addressed the Galactic Concord with triumph in his voice. "The humans have retreated," he declared. "They have crawled back to their little corner of the galaxy to lick their wounds. They have finally learned their place among the stars." The Concord celebrated. The Velthari held feasts in honor of their victory over the weak humans. The Korathi laughed and made jokes about human cowardice. The Draenari simply noted the human withdrawal and returned to their cold calculations. But Matriarch Shara Kol of the Korathi did not celebrate. She was a warrior who had spent her life studying enemies, and something about the human silence troubled her deeply. She sent her spies to the borders of human space, but none of them returned. She aimed her sensors at human worlds. But the readings made no sense. The energy signatures from human space had increased by a factor of 1,000. Every human world was burning with industrial activity. Every human shipyard was working at a pace that should have been impossible. Something was happening behind that wall of silence. And Shara Kol was afraid to discover what it was. Admiral Christopher Grant stood at the center of the transformation. The president had given him complete authority over the military buildup, and Christopher used that authority without hesitation. Factories that had produced civilian goods now produced weapons. Scientists who had studied medicine now studied destruction. Engineers who had built homes now built warships. The carrier, Razut, had been the pride of the human fleet before the silence. It was a fine ship, capable and sturdy, but it was built for defense and diplomacy. Christopher ordered it stripped down and rebuilt from the frame up. When the work was complete, the Resolute was twice its original size and carried enough firepower to crack a moon, Commander. Patricia Cole coordinated the intelligence network that spread across the galaxy like invisible threads. For 300 years, humanity had been underestimated and ignored. Aliens spoke freely in front of human servants and human merchants and human diplomats, never imagining that every word was being recorded and analyzed. Patricia now had files on every major species in the Concord. She knew their patrol routes and their supply lines. She knew their political divisions and their military weaknesses. She knew exactly where to strike to cause maximum damage. Captain Laura Bennett had survived the destruction of the Gentle Dawn by pure chance. She had been on the surface of New Providence when the attack happened, coordinating the loading of another transport. She watched from the ground as the ship she had commanded for 15 years exploded in the sky above her. She was among the last humans evacuated from New Providence. The Velthari let the final transports leave, perhaps satisfied that they had made their point. Laura arrived on Earth, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a burning hole where her heart used to be. The Navy offered her a desk job. She refused. They offered her a training position. She refused. She demanded a combat command, and after 3 weeks of arguing, they gave her one. Her new ship was called the Reckoning. It was 3 kilometers long and bristled with weapons that had not existed 6 months ago. It carried enough troops to invade a planet and enough bombs to destroy one. Laura walked through its corridors and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. "This is what we should have built years ago," she told Christopher during an inspection. "This is what we should have been all along." Christopher shook his head. "No, this is what they forced us to become. There is a difference." 6 months after the silence began, a Korathi pirate fleet attacked a human convoy near the Aldrin Passage. The pirates had been raiding human ships for decades without consequence. They expected this attack to be no different. 12 human warships were waiting for them. The battle lasted for minutes. The Korathi pirates used every trick they knew, every maneuver that had served them well against human vessels in the past. Nothing worked. Human weapons cut through Korathi shields like they were made of paper. Human ships moved with a speed and precision that should have been impossible. When the battle ended, not a single Korathi pirate ship remained. The human fleet had not lost a single vessel. They had not even lost a single crew member, but the humans did not stop there. They followed the pirate fleet's navigation records back to their base, a hidden station deep in Korathi space. The station was built into an asteroid and protected by defenses that should have taken a fleet weeks to overcome. The human ships destroyed it in 3 hours. More importantly, they captured the station's records before it was destroyed. Communications between the pirate commanders and high-ranking Korathi military officials, financial transfers from Korathi government accounts to pirate operations, orders signed by admirals and generals authorizing attacks on human vessels. The evidence was broadcast across every frequency in the galaxy. Every species in the Concord saw proof that the Korathi government had been sponsoring piracy against humanity for over a century. The Concord demanded an explanation from the SS. Korathi matriarch Shara Cole had no explanation to give. The evidence was undeniable. Her government had been caught in a lie that had lasted generations. She looked at the human broadcast and felt something she had never felt before in her long warrior life. She felt afraid. The humans sent a single message to the Galactic Concord. It was not a complaint. It was not a request for justice. It was not a diplomatic proposal. It was a list of demands. Full reparations for every human.
Nice.
Life lost to Korathi-sponsored piracy. Public acknowledgement of Korathi crimes before the Concord Assembly. Immediate cessation of all hostile activities against human vessels and human territory. The Concord had 48 hours to respond. "Hi," Speaker Zithros laughed when he read the demands. "The humans think they can give us ultimatums," he said. "They destroy a few pirates and suddenly they believe they are our equals." Shara Cole did not laugh. She had seen the sensor readings from the Aldrin Passage. She had analyzed the wreckage of her pirate fleet. She understood what the humans had become during their 6 months of silence. "They are not our equals," she said quietly. "They are something far worse." The Concord ignored the human demands. They believed that humanity was bluffing, that the attack on the pirate base was a desperate show of strength from a species on the verge of collapse. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The 48 hours passed without a response from the Galactic Concord. High Speaker Zithros believed that silence was the appropriate answer to human arrogance. He sat in his chamber on Zithos Prime and imagined the humans growing desperate as their ultimatum expired. He imagined them realizing that they were still the weak, insignificant species they had always been. He was still imagining this when the alarms began to scream. Admiral Christopher Grant stood on the bridge of the flagship Unconquered and watched the largest fleet in human history emerge from faster-than-light travel. 2,000 warships appeared around Zithos Prime in perfect formation, surrounding the Velthary, homeworld, like a fist closing around a beating heart. The Unconquered was the greatest vessel humanity had ever built. It stretched 5 kilometers from bow to stern and carried enough weapons to reduce a continent to glass. Christopher had hoped he would never have to use it. That hope had died with the children of the Gentle Dawn. Commander Patricia Cole stood beside him, reading the tactical displays that showed the disposition of Velthary forces. The Velthary had assembled their entire defense fleet to protect their homeworld. 300 warships, each one crewed by warriors who believed they were the finest fighters in the galaxy. "They outnumber us," Patricia said. "But not by enough." Christopher nodded. "Signal, all ships. Weapons free. But remember our orders. Not a single shot touches the planet below. We are here to break their military, not their civilization." The Velthari fleet moved to intercept the human formation. Admiral Krithos, the finest military commander the Velthari had produced in a century, led the charge personally. He had studied human tactics for years and believed he understood how they fought. He believed the humans were soft, hesitant, unwilling to take risks. He was wrong about everything. The battle began with a human maneuver that no Velthari had ever seen before. The human fleet split into dozens of smaller groups that moved with perfect coordination, striking at Velthari ships from multiple angles simultaneously. Velthari commanders tried to respond, but the humans were too fast, too precise, too overwhelming. Captain Laura Bennett commanded the reckoning at the center of the heaviest fighting. Her ship carved through Velthari formations like a blade through silk. She felt nothing as she watched enemy vessels explode on her view screen. She had used up all her tears on New Providence. All that remained was cold purpose. A Velthari dreadnought moved to intercept the reckoning. It was one of the largest ships in the Velthari fleet, commanded by a veteran captain who had won a dozen battles. Laura did not hesitate. She drove the reckoning straight at the dreadnought, fired every weapon she had. The dreadnought lasted 8 seconds, Admiral. Krethos watched his fleet crumble around him. Ships that should have taken hours to destroy were dying in minutes. Tactics that should have worked were failing completely. The humans fought with a fury and precision that he had never imagined possible. He sent a desperate message to High Speaker Zithros. "We cannot hold them. You must evacuate." Zithros received the message in his throne room. For the first time in his long life, he felt the cold touch of fear. He had pushed the humans for 300 years, confident that they would never push back. He had ordered the destruction of the Gentle Dawn, believing that humans would simply accept another loss, as it had accepted so many before. He had been catastrophically wrong. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it ended, the Velthari had lost 80% of their military capacity. Their orbital defense platforms were scattered, debris drifting in the void. Their proud warships were either destroyed or captured. Admiral Krithos died on the bridge of his flagship, still trying to rally his forces even as human weapons tore his vessel apart. And through it all, not a single human weapon touched Zithos Prime. The planet below remained untouched, its billions of inhabitants watching the destruction of their fleet with growing horror. Christopher broadcast a message to the Velthari homeworld. His voice was calm, almost gentle, which somehow made it more terrifying. "People of Zithos Prime," he said, "your fleet is destroyed. Your defenses are gone. We could burn your world to ash, and there is nothing you could do to stop us. But we are not here for destruction. We are here for justice." High Speaker Zithros was brought before Admiral Grant in the hangar bay of the Unconquered. The once proud Velthari leader was bound in energy restraints, his compound eyes dull with shock and defeat. He had ruled his people for 60 years and had never known failure until this moment. Christopher looked at him without hatred. There was no satisfaction in his eyes, no triumph, no joy. There was only weariness and a profound sadness. "You could have avoided this," Christopher said. 300 years ago, you could have welcomed us as friends. 100 years ago, you could have treated us as equals. A year ago, you could have simply left us alone. Instead, you killed our children and laughed about it. Zithros found his voice. "You will destroy us now. That is what conquerors do." Christopher shook his head. "No, that is what you would do. We are not you. We never wanted to prove we could destroy. We only wanted to prove that we would not be destroyed." The terms of surrender were broadcast across the galaxy. Every species in the Concord watched as the mighty Velthari were brought low by the humans they had mocked for. Centuries the Velthari would pay. Reparations to the families of everyone who died on the Gentle Dawn and at New Providence. They would publicly acknowledge their crimes before the full Concord Assembly. They would recognize humanity as equals in all matters of galactic law. And High Speaker Zithros personally apologized to the parents of every child who died because of his orders. The terms were harsh but not cruel. The humans could have demanded the destruction of Velthari civilization. They could have bombarded Zithos Prime until nothing remained but dust and memory. They had the power to commit genocide. No one in the galaxy could have stopped them. Instead, they chose mercy. Captain Laura Bennett led the humanitarian fleet that followed the warships. Her vessels carried medical supplies, food, and reconstruction materials. The same species that had just shattered. The Velthari military now helped them tend their wounded and repair their stations. Laura personally oversaw the delivery of supplies to a Velthari orbital hospital that had been damaged in the battle. Velthari doctors stared at her with confusion and fear as she directed her crew to unload medicine and equipment. "Why?" one of them asked. "Why are you helping us after what we did to your people?" Laura thought of Marcus Webb, the young pilot who had begged for mercy with his last breath. She thought of the 800 children who had died without understanding why. "Because someone has to be better," she said. "Someone has to break the cycle. And if not us, then who?" The galaxy watched in stunned silence. This was not how conquerors behaved. This was not how enemies treated each other. This was something new, something strange, something that made the other species deeply uncomfortable. Because if humans could be this merciful after such terrible provocation, what did that say about everyone else? 1 year had passed since the Battle of Zithos Prime. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. Old alliances had crumbled. Ancient powers had been humbled. And humanity, the species that had been mocked and dismissed for 3 centuries, now stood at the center of galactic civilization. Ambassador Daniel Price walked through the corridors of the Concord Assembly on Nexus Prime. He remembered walking these same corridors as a young man, full of hope and dreams that had been crushed again and again. He remembered the laughter of alien delegates and the contempt in their eyes. He remembered being told that humanity would never belong among the stars. Now those same delegates stepped aside as he passed. They lowered their eyes and spoke in respectful tones. Some even bowed, though Daniel had never asked for such gestures. He found the change uncomfortable, but he understood why it had happened. The assembly chamber was full when Daniel entered. Representatives from every species in the galaxy had gathered for this historic session. The Velthari delegation sat in diminished numbers, their once proud high speaker replaced by a younger, more humble leader. The Korathi were present, their matriarch Shara Cole, watching everything with calculating eyes. The Draenari sat in cold silence, having quietly surrendered all claims against humanity months ago. When Daniel took his place at the podium, every representative in the chamber stood. This had never happened before for any species. It was a gesture of respect that the Concord had reserved for only the most honored members. Daniel waited for silence before he spoke. "We did not want this," he said. His voice was calm but carried clearly through the vast chamber. "We did not come to the stars seeking enemies. We did not build our fleets hoping for war. For 300 years, we tried to show you who we were through patience and kindness." He paused and looked around the chamber. He saw fear in some eyes, respect in others, and confusion in many. "You taught us that patience has limits. You taught us that kindness without strength is merely an invitation for cruelty. So we showed you our strength. We showed you what humanity does when our children are murdered and our people are scattered." The chamber was absolutely silent. Not a single being moved or whispered. "But now you will see something else. Now you will see what humanity does with power." Daniel activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber. Images appeared showing human activities across the galaxy over the past year. Medical ships treating wounded Velthari soldiers. Engineers helping rebuild damaged Korathi stations. Teachers opening schools on Draenari colony worlds. Scientists sharing research that could benefit all species. "We are not your conquerors," Daniel said. "We are not your masters. We are your neighbors." And we will prove through 1,000 years of action that the hand we extend in friendship is the same hand that holds our sword. He looked directly at the Velthari delegation, where the former High Speaker Zithros sat in chains as part of his sentence. "We forgive you," Daniel said. "Not because you deserve it, but because holding on to hatred would destroy us more surely than any weapon. But we will never forget, and we will never again mistake our own kindness for weakness." The chamber erupted in something unprecedented. Applause, genuine. Applause from species that had spent centuries looking down on humanity. The sound filled the great hall and echoed through the corridors beyond. On Earth, President Samuel Torres watched the broadcast with Admiral Christopher Grant and Commander Patricia Cole. They sat in the president's private office, a simple room with windows that looked out over a garden that Torres tended himself. "Do you think they will remember?" Patricia asked. "Do you think they will remember what we showed them?" Christopher nodded slowly. "They will remember. Every species in that chamber will tell their children about the moment humanity stopped asking and started declaring. They will remember that we could have destroyed them, chose not to." Torres turned away from the screen and looked out at his garden. Small green plants were pushing through the soil, reaching for the sun. He had planted them the day after the Battle of Zithos Prime, needing something to remind him that growth was still possible after so much destruction. "That is our legacy now," he said quietly. "Not our patience, not our war, but what we chose to do when we had every reason to be cruel and chose mercy instead." Captain Laura Bennett did not watch the broadcast. She was too busy commanding a relief mission to a remote colony that had been struck by a meteor shower. Her ship, the Reckoning, had been retrofitted to carry humanitarian supplies alongside its weapons. She preferred it that way. A young officer approached her on the bridge. "Captain," he said, "the colony governor is asking to speak with you personally. He wants to thank you for coming so quickly." Laura shook her head. "Tell him thanks are not necessary. Tell him this is what we do." She thought about Marcus Webb, the young pilot who had died begging for mercy. She thought about the promise she had made to herself on the day she took command of the Reckoning. She would fight when fighting was needed. She would destroy when destruction was necessary. But she would also heal and help and build whenever she could. That was what it meant to be human, in the depths of space. On 100 worlds and 1,000 stations, the story of humanity spread like fire. Parents told their children about the species that had endured 3 centuries of contempt without losing their souls. Warriors told their students about the fleet that had crushed the mighty Velthari and then fed their wounded. Philosophers debated what it meant that the humans had shown such terrible power and such profound mercy in the same breath. The Korathi, matriarch Shara Cole, requested a formal alliance with humanity. She had spent her life as a warrior and had never respected any species that could not fight. But she had also never seen a species that could fight so well and yet choose not to fight when victory was already assured. She wanted to understand these strange creatures, and more importantly, she wanted them as allies rather than enemies. The Draenari High Council quietly began adopting human legal concepts into their own society. They had always prided themselves on cold logic and rational calculation. They now calculated that treating other species with basic dignity was more logical than endless conflict. Even the Velthari, humbled and diminished, began to change. Young Velthari grew up hearing stories about the humans who had defeated their fleet and then helped rebuild their hospitals. Some of them began to question whether the old ways of contempt and cruelty had ever truly served their people. Ambassador Daniel Price retired 5 years after his speech to the Concord Assembly. He had finally accomplished what he had set out to do as a young man. Humanity had been recognized as equals. More than equals. Humanity had become the moral center of the galaxy. The species that other species measured themselves against. On his last day as ambassador, Daniel walked through the corridors of the Concord one final time. A young Velthari delegate stopped him and bowed deeply. "Ambassador Price," the young Velthari said, "my grandfather served under High Speaker Zithros. He was there when your people were denied membership for the 17th time. He laughed at your delegation that day." Daniel nodded. He remembered that day well. The young Veltheri straightened and looked Daniel in the eyes. I want you to know that I am not my grandfather. None of us are anymore. Your people taught us that strength without mercy is just cruelty, and cruelty destroys the one who wields it. We are trying to be better now. We are trying to be more like you. Daniel smiled, and for the first time in many years, the smile reached his eyes. That is all we ever wanted, he said. Not worship, fear. Just the chance to show you who we really are. He walked out of the assembly and into the light of a new day. No species would ever forget the moment when human patience finally snapped. But more importantly, no species would ever forget what humans did afterward. They would remember the war, yes, but they would remember the mercy more, and that made all the difference.